Hello again. Sarah's just still going to just be in the background setting up while I do this. I hope that's okay. I'm here to talk to you about this contraption. This is AMS, which is generally I refer to as acoustic modular system, but it takes a form that's quite specifically derived from a type of synthesizer called a modular synthesizer. And a modular synthesizer is generally a case with a number of standard sized modules that all perform a role, and you patch them together in order to get certain outcomes. In its most extreme form, they are whole wall-sized, like lights and bleepy things all over the place, and literally hundreds of patch cables to make certain joints in the circuit in order to have certain outcomes. Weirdly, in electronic modular land, it doesn't seem to matter how many modules you have. A lot of the output is kind of blip, blop, 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 that sort of thing, right? Which is all good, but sort of strange that is how it often comes out. The principle for arriving at that, though, is a series of choices that the musician makes in what each of those modules does. So they are the really lovely thing about modular synths is that they each perform such a very tiny specific role. And because of that, you end up with people being able to adapt their system to do exactly what they want it to do. And also as a synth maker, it's a very different proposition to someone who's making let's say, well, I can't actually point to anything here that's similar, but if you buy a synth built into a keyboard, the person who builds that synth, the company that builds that synth, they have to think in terms of how do I make the keyboard, first of all? How do I make the casing? How do I then make an oscillator that then patches into a sequencer that patches into an oscillator that then patches into a filter bank that, so on and so on and so on. With modular gear, it's lovely because you don't think in those terms as a maker. You might have a really strange idea, like it might be, I want a module that when I stick soft fruit on a surface, it makes squelchy noises. That can be a module that you can manufacture and sell, because someone would probably want that. I mean, I would. Who wouldn't? Someone will want that, and then you don't have to worry about what sounds does it make, because that's what happens later down the line with someone else's module. So when you're building modular systems like that, which is the core of quite a lot of my work, it's really nice because I can think in those terms with the things that I'm making as well. So if I want just to extend what it can do to a very specific end, I can just build a new module for it. I should say at this stage, when I say I can just build a new module for it, the true process is I phone up Richard, and Richard, sat back there, we chat at some length about what specifically it needs to do. Richard then mostly just builds the module, and then it turns up. And I use it, and then we tweak what it does. And then quite a lot of the time as well, I will build versions, like multiples of a module. So another thing that happens in modular land is you might have a single oscillator module, for example, which will probably go blip, blop, blip, blop, blip, blop, like that. You can then have two of those by buying two, and you just plug them together and you've got two. That applies to many of these modules. So for example, these modules that you see here, there's 4 of those they're all duplicates of one another. But if you want to hit more things, you need more modules. So that's the principle of how it works. Until I started my research, I would have said an acoustic modular synth is a new thing. Don't know. In my head, it was a new thing, and I think as formally structured as a modular synth as this is, it is quite new ground. But there are lots of people, Tim's also one of them really, who are making acoustic modular systems and instruments that aren't so strictly modular synth based, but are in every other sense modular and acoustic. So there's a lot of interesting work that I've found through doing my research. I don't know if any of this is making any sense in terms of what it actually does. So I think probably one good way to go through what it does is to show you some of the different modules. We'll start with, as I've mentioned it already, we'll start with this. Oh, I'll mention as well how these leads are what you end up with, loads of patches all around the place in order to make up, well, actually they're called patches. So when you patch a series of wires together, you end up with a patch, and that patch makes a certain outcome happen. It does that all over something called a standardized format, basically called control voltage. And for anyone who's familiar with MIDI, so MIDI, you press a key on the keyboard, say, the extent to which you press it, where it is on the keyboard, what else? Oh, the on-off state of the key. Those are all things which happen in MIDI, but can also be transmitted over something called control voltage. So if I can actually make a control voltage. Maybe I could show you this as one of the easiest demos. If I take, I haven't quite worked out a way as well, and this is often a thing with modular, I haven't quite worked out a way to show you the instrument but not turn my back to you. I mean, basically, it's one or the other. So if I take this module, which is a very recent, in fact, it's very prototypey still. Let's plug that into. So this is always the fun bit, finding the leads. Okay, this module picks up tapping and converts it into a control voltage. So it's the most basic control voltage that you could want. So if I then pop my little thing up there, take a beater out of here, we stick this on here. It's not really going to hit that very well, is it? Let's take this. So now, every time I do that, it clouts that, okay? That is just these things are just strange microphones that when you hit them, create enough voltage. They create they will light an LED if you bend them, for example. So they're a strange little microphone element that in this context, it creates enough voltage to just trigger the control voltage on the input of one of these. The other thing with modular stuff, and this applies to acoustic modular and electronic modular really, is that you have a set series of stages. You have stages that are intended to control the system, stages that are intended to make sounds, stages that are intended to shape sounds, etc. That applies in this, and in the case of just the general control, I'm able to use quite standard equipment in order to do that, because it all works over control voltage. So this keyboard can be plugged directly into one of these. If we take one of these wires. This is a bought keyboard, so I don't have to worry about the building of the keyboard thing again. And I'm going to put a slightly more sensible beater on there. So now when I press this key on the keyboard, then it does the beater. But because it's a clever keyboard, you can record things into it and it'll keep playing those repeatedly. You can, because again, I don't have to design all of this stuff. Some of it is already designed for me. So now I could make this like randomized, if I can remember how to do that. Yeah, that. And then it just carries on about its business over control voltage, straight out of this controller and straight into the module. There's a number of, I don't know how nerdy I'll really want to be about some of this, but there's a number of design considerations with an acoustic modular synth which are very unusual, and Sarah. And we've really strived to consider in quite some depth. So I think firstly, an element of all of my work when thinking about modular instruments is to think about the modularity right to the end of any chain. So just keep getting more and more. It's almost like, I've referred to it in the past as fractal modularity, because basically you've got modular on top of layers and layers of modularity. So if I take, this is the good case in point, I can just swap a beater out, and normally in these sorts of these mechanized robotic drum machines, you will have a system where you have a beater that's always the same. It's always hitting in exactly the same way. You might be able to change something like the velocity of the hit, but there's very little else that you can do to change it. Whereas in the context of AMS, you can change the beater entirely. If you change the beater entirely, you get quite a different sound, like a much harsher sound or whatever. These are then magnetic, so you can attach other bits onto it, which kind of knackers it a bit, but in a nice way, makes it kind of really organic, modular system. Also, the whole thing is on a posable arm, so if I want to, if I've got it playing a thing, and I want it to kind of strike it in a different manner, and I can just move the arm and the whole tone of the sound changes. Or if I want to turn it off, but I can just turn it off that way, which is it's a very unusual way to be able to turn it off, but it's still doing its thing, but it's turned off. It has a series of other clever controls. For example, you can alter how hard it hits. So it doesn't have to always be a full-on thwack. It can do quite subtle percussive feathering kind of hits. They come in pairs on this module because the second of these is controllable in a way where it doesn't just do a single hit. It can have pressure applied, so that, for example, if you're dampening a skin or something like that, you can press it harder to dampen more or less, and so on. So each of the drum modules has all of that capability built into it and is very malleable from a performance point of view. That's where the bit I mentioned up there about kind of human and machine music really comes in, because a lot of computer-controlled musical machines especially are hard to adapt in real time. And if you think about mechanical musical instruments from times before, like, I don't know, let's go right back to the 1800s, early 1900s, those sorts of machines really were not designed for a player. They were designed to have a sheet of card with punched holes that would faithfully reproduce the music that it was fed. A lot of my work fights that tendency and that way of approaching it. So to make a live playable, but also computer controllable and or sequenceable at least system. So it deals with some of the playing while I get on with doing other things. So I don't know, if you can do any manner, of course, of playing along with this whilst it's running all of the rest of the stuff for you. I'll quickly demo, I'll just quickly run through a couple of the other modules. So all of this modular gear is kind of weird when you see module performances, because quite a lot of it is just I was going to say guy, but it's often a guy. But anyway, someone just patching leads all over the place, and it's hard to tell what's going on. That's is another reason why I think acoustic modular is quite an interesting concept and way of approaching it, because it does lead to, you still have me, the guy, patching all of the leads in and out, but you then have some visual representation of what happens as a result. So I don't know, let's, if I plug this one into here, say, so I can make this bellows move. I don't know if you can see that. That bellows now moves when I press the key on the keyboard, okay? As I said before, if you do need to come up and have a look, you can have a look. So if I it doesn't make an awful lot of sense unless I put a pipe on it. So if I put a pipe on there, and that's still probably sequenced. And it'll keep peeping the pipe. You can tell it how much to peep it. And it'll just keep doing the rhythmical pattern, but with that control over how it does it. Now, the other thing with it all being inside out in the way that it is, so that you've got access to all of these things, is that normally an organ pipe is stuck away out of, I mean, you might be able to reach them on some, there's a huge set of them up there that I'm very aware of. You might be able to reach them in some cases, but most of the time that is certainly not the done thing. In this case, I mean, I don't know, let's, you can just, adapt the sound that it makes in real time. And as I said before, some modules you just kind of need more of. So there are 3 of those. So you've got 3 separate organ pipe playing modules. These ones next to them, so I've kind of paired them up because they're quite useful to work together. These ones next to them use a different type of way of blowing into organ pipes. So they use a fan, and that gives you a drone instead of that sort of percussive organ pipe note. These have 2 ways of controlling them. So this is the bit where the guy plugs in all the cables and stuff. If you give this a So these can be played so that when you it's not a very good demo because the organ pipes are tuned to the same note. Let's try it with two differently pitched ones. So what that allows you to do is have drone notes that originally they had two drone notes and you could switch between them. You could also kind of rev up the fan so that it blows harder through the pipes. What it now has is an option to kind of give it an in-between note so that it'll play chords across the two notes to varying degrees. So you can have it settle on quite awkward harmonies just because one pipe is not being blown quite enough. So it sounds a bit off, which is the kind of part of the name of the game, really. I'm just wondering about time. What time is it? past. Fairly soon I'll be stopping, so I'm going to ask if anybody has, and I don't know, I've probably left lots of things unsaid. I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions about AMS.
When you do a performance,
Yes.
do you actually have to pick music in order to remember?
Tonight is the first performance.
Repeat the question back.
I need to repeat the question. The question was, oh God, I'm not, God, anyway, sorry, a bit tired. The question was, when I do a performance, do I have music that I work from? And the answer is tonight is my first performance. But I mostly do semi-improvised live performances. So I will have done, and in this case I've done some, but not maybe enough. I will have mostly done quite a lot of rehearsal and understand some of the structure of what I'm going to do. But then a lot of decisions are made on the fly. Things don't come out quite the same, so I just go with that instead, or that sort of thing. Any more questions?
I was just wondering what you're trying to achieve.
The question was, what am I trying to achieve? Or is it just research? Well, I don't know, really. I don't know. I'm certainly trying to answer some of the questions that some of the music that I used to listen to, and do still sometimes listen to, posed as an audience member. So I'm quite into electronic music. I used to go to a lot of electronic music live performances, and I put the emphasis on live there a little bit because quite often I was faced with a live performance that I didn't know what the person was doing. You know, it was very hard to discern what was going on. So at least a significant chunk of why I build these sorts of machines is to answer that for myself as an audience member in those situations, because I want to feel like it's an exchange, one that's open and people understand what's going on. So that's part of it. I also, I think the area in general of people making mechanical musical instruments with human players is hugely underexplored, and I don't know, maybe some instruments will come out of it that are useful to somebody, I don't know. So, certainly I think some processes will do. But anyway. Any more questions? Yes.
Did AMS
These.
On the left-hand side,
Yeah, these two.
Did you cover, was that part of the first bit that you, is that something you haven't shown us?
No, that's something I haven't shown you. One of the question was about these two modules here and what they do. This one is a control module, and what this one does is it spins, and it has these funky platters on. It has a kind of magnetic platter on it. So you can place one of these on, and it spins, and then onto that you can place these things, and then as it gets close to that sensor, it outputs CV. So it's basically a tiny little platter sequencer that can run at X speed, like you set it to a speed, and that'll output, like I'll plug it into something and then you'll see. I need to get the right cables. That's maybe not quite going to reach. Hang on a sec. So every time that passes there, it causes that to do its thing. So that's a control module, which we don't have many of. And then this one was originally intended to, believe it or not, to turn over one of those cow toys that goes whenever you gave it CV and gate. Now I've made it into another magnetic platter one, but side on, and the way that makes kind of textural noises when you attach metal objects to it. It kind of rattles around and makes textural noises. Actually, I think that's very briefly. I'll just mention something along those lines. So the texture of sound is more, you will never guess this from listening to what you've heard so far. The texture of sounds is what I'm more interested in than playing a tune. So the texture and timbre of sounds and how drones and those sorts of sounds and scratchiness and all of that stuff, that's just of greater interest to me than being able to play, get this machine to play a sonata or whatever. I mean, also, getting it to play a sonata is quite hard. I won't deny that. But it's just, for me, aesthetically, as a musician, it's of more interest that it makes this range of interesting textural sounds above normal notes. Thank you.